Okay, we'll make a start, and obviously if anyone joins us, then they're very welcome to do so. I'm just going to run through a little bit of housekeeping to start with, and welcome you all to the current state of the Restorative Justice, a webinar that we're hosting with RJ4All. So just a little bit of housekeeping to kick us off. If you're not speaking, then we just ask that cameras and mics are off, and that's for everybody except for the speakers, just to ensure that we're able to run through clearly and everybody can see and hear the speakers as they're talking, going through their presentation. There's a use of the question and answer function to ask questions throughout. We anticipate we'll have around 10 minutes for questions at the end. If we don't manage to answer your question, then we will be sharing frequently asked questions and getting them answered at the end, which we'll share in an email just to make sure that all questions are answered throughout the discussion today. You'll see that the session is currently being recorded. The recording will be made available on demand through a link which will be shared via email at the end of the session. For accessibility, if you require live captions, you can enable this within Teams on your desktop. So if you go to the meeting controls at the top of the screen and select More, then Language and Speech, and then turn on live captions, you can do this. You can also use the QR code at the bottom of the screen there to take you to the Microsoft support page for more information. As I say, we will be summarising afterwards today with some information from the session today and the link and any questions that we haven't asked. So there will be an email to follow after the webinar has concluded today. So for those of you who haven't heard of us and don't know about Skills for Justice already, we are a not-for-profit organisation. We're a charity in the UK. We were established around 20 years ago as a sector skills council. So we provide consultancy and research tailored to meet the operational requirements across the justice sector. Our expertise and experiences include services such as workforce planning, training, research and evaluation, coaching and mentoring, quality assurance and audits. Our consultants are all industry experts and subject matter experts in their fields. Many have backgrounds in the justice sector, meaning that we understand the challenges experienced and we're very well placed, therefore, to support our public sector colleagues. As a charity, our vision is always to look to improve lives through better skills, better jobs, and through the delivery of better services. Skills for Justice support organisations to strengthen and improve the workforces and ultimately improve outcomes for the public. We support a vast number of colleagues across the justice sector, including fire and rescue, defence, local authority sector employers and policing, and are trusted partners of hundreds of organisations across the justice sector. I'm really pleased to welcome today's speakers. We've got colleagues from RJ4All joining us today to share their insights into restorative justice, particularly beneficial this week as it's Restorative Justice Awareness Week. So we're really pleased to be partnering with RJ4All. And this webinar kicks off a brilliant partnership between Skills for Justice and RJ4All, which we will be discussing how we're going to be providing additional benefits for our Skills for Justice and RJ4All members throughout the webinar today. And further information from that will follow today as well in the follow-up email. With aligned values, it's a great collaboration and we're really excited to share this with you throughout the morning today. And we're really pleased to have Theo, Sophia and Lynn with us from RJ4All. So Skills for Justice have invited RJ4All to talk to you today about restorative justice and RJ4All. I'm now delighted to hand over to Theo of the team who will introduce themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Shall I go first then?
Sure,
So,
you can go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name is Theo Gavrilidis. I'm the founder and director of Restorative Justice for All, RJ4All, as Laura said. RJ4All is an international institute. We are independent. We function across the UK and internationally, and I guess we look at restorative justice as a method, as a methodology for addressing conflict, but also improving our society. We look at it from research evidence-based point of view, including raising awareness and educational standards within the field, but also practice restorative justice where it's appropriate. I guess my background, before I turned to the dark side of restorative justice, I trained as a criminal law barrister and as a human rights lawyer. And then obviously I met restorative justice and left that behind me. Sophia, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. My name is Sophia. I'm research coordinator at Restorative Justice for All, and I'm also managing the Europe side of things. I work in Europe. My background is in law and criminology. I'm originally from Greece. I'm a qualified lawyer in Greece, but I decided to leave practicing law behind. And my entire focus is the last 2.5 years in restorative justice and research in the field of criminology and specifically restorative justice. Lynn, off to you to introduce yourself before we get started.
Hi everyone, I am Lynn, the communication consultant at RJ4All, and I work with the communication team and also other stakeholders to communicate about what RJ4All is doing at international and national level. And my background is media and communication, and I have more than 5 years of experience working in non-profit sector. Nice to join you today.
Theo, you can get started, I guess. I'm trying to change the slide. Yeah.
Yeah. I could go to the next one. All right. Well, what a fantastic way to finish Restorative Justice Week. For those who don't know, International Restorative Justice Week is an awareness raising week that has been going on for some time, and obviously the aim of the week is to raise awareness of restorative justice. So thank you, Laura, and to Skills for Justice for inviting us to give you this lecture, which we hope will be useful to you and engage in a dialogue. I understand that Laura will be taking questions as we speak. I think you can type them in your screens, and then we'll leave enough time at the end to have a dialogue and answer any questions that you have. So yeah, the partnership, I think that's also something very exciting for us, because obviously we want to raise awareness about restorative justice, but as you will hear from my lecture, we want to raise awareness while also looking at the evidence. And as I said at the beginning, our institute is very much focused on an evidence-driven practice and an evidence-driven education and awareness raising for restorative justice. And that's why probably you'll see some parts of my presentation saying the good news and the bad news. And I guess, and if you want to go forward, Sophia, just carry on. The purpose, I guess, for International Restorative Justice Week is not just to say how good we are and how fantastic restorative justice is, but also to be self-critical and to look at what we can do as a movement, but also with the criminal justice system and the youth justice system to improve practices, and also what works well and what doesn't work that well. I guess another purpose for Restorative Justice Week is to meet you and for you to meet us and those who haven't heard about us or the concept or practice of restorative justice, to engage with it, to ask questions, and I guess alternatively, ultimately to find alternatives, because that's what it's all about. I think restorative justice is about providing those alternatives and not taking anything away from anybody, including victims and offenders. So yeah, we like to be self-critical, and I think that's through debate and dialogue, including, restorative justice dialogue, that I think we can all improve. And it's within that spirit that we're giving this lecture. So I'm looking forward to getting your questions and challenges. So I'm just gonna be dipping in and out, and I'm gonna be letting Sophia to articulate mainly the current state of restorative justice, at least in the UK. So my contribution will be more of a critical analysis of restorative justice. But just to start with the good news, I guess, restorative justice has been around for some time. And it's not by coincidence that recently, and also when I say recently, maybe over the last 20 years, restorative justice has been mentioned in countries like the UK and other common law systems as an alternative to criminal justice and youth justice. But if you look at the history of restorative justice, and I've put one of the publications, and there's lots of other papers on the history of restorative justice, or what I call it, the rise and fall of restorative justice, goes back as the ancient Greek, or even longer than that, civilizations. It was the main methodology through which communities and conflict was resolved. And as we progressed with our structured criminal justice systems that followed the Middle Ages and the construction of the state as it was at the time, the conflict between the parties was taken away, or was being controlled more and more by the kingdom or the state, and the structured criminal justice system then started to marginalize the usage of restorative justice. I'm not going to go into the details of it, just staying with the good news that back in the 70s, people started to ask questions about the effectiveness of the criminal justice system and looking at alternatives. And people started to write about restorative justice. We had papers like Niels Christie paper in the 70s, titled Conflict as Property, and giving people who own the conflict ownership, and taking it away from people like us, lawyers, and giving them to manage. And then gradually restorative justice in literature and in legislation continued to grow, and we are where we are today. I just highlighted some international laws and instruments, but I know Sophia is going to go into the details of this and even more in a minute. But just to say, in terms of the good news, because restorative justice is not just a practice or some sort of an idea, it is also something that me personally, as a criminal lawyer, if you divert a case from a criminal justice system, it is a method that takes that option away from the one that we are used to through the courts, the police, probation, and so on. So having regulations and having laws such as the Victims Directive, for example, that has restorative justice articles within it, and as you know, at least when we were in Europe, directives are higher types of legislation that must be implemented into the legal order. But also we have recommendations from the Council of Europe. We're still members of the Council of Europe. There are handbooks and recommendations from the United Nations. So in terms of its development, of its legislative presence in the international space, it has some good standing, I would say. So there's no lack of any laws or any regulations at the international level. And I'm just going to stop here before I become critical of implementation and allow Sophia to cover some of the particular aspects within those laws and those policies, whether they're at the international or the UK level. But just to finish off the good news, restorative justice, I'm going to touch on this in a minute. We say restorative justice, and I think the problem that we have in our language is the difference between the restorative justice as a wider, or as the academics call it, the maximalistic vision of restorative justice as an ethos, as a movement, and then its practices, which are what we are used to hearing about, whether it's mediation or conferencing and so on. And restorative justice as a social movement, as an ethos, as a way of managing our relationships, not necessarily within the criminal justice system, but even at home, has developed quite considerably, I would say. And I've put some initiatives, at least from the institute that I am running, that we are pushing, tapping into this idea of restorative justice being a social movement, such as, for example, we created the International Fellowship of International Restorative Justice Practitioners, bringing people together who practice across the world to speak and to push for alternative peace processes. So that's trying to create a bit of a momentum with people who work in the space, but also to enable networking and a practice that is aligned with the values of restorative justice. The same goes for the pledge that we are asking people to sign up to, and these are values that we have drawn from human rights, because restorative justice is so much aligned with the human rights narrative, and obviously the shared values that human rights protect. And we are piloting in SE16 in London a project, a vision, to build the world's first restorative justice postcode. Not going to go into the details of it, but again, it's based on this idea that if we all live in our neighborhoods a restorative justice life, allowing our services and our neighbors and our families to behave within those values and those principles, would that improve community cohesion? Would that bring poverty and the reasons that lead to antisocial behavior down? That is a pilot project that we're implementing, and we have been implementing for the last 2 years in SE16. And as I said, from an evidence-based view, I am very open-minded to see whether that actually does what it says on the tin. So stay tuned, and I'll let you know in a few years' time. Finishing off, the literature, as I said, on restorative justice is so rich. And when I hear about there's not enough on definitions and this and that about restorative justice, I get really frustrated, because the volumes on restorative justice are endless, which is great. It's good news. We have dedicated peer-reviewed journals on restorative justice. That is fantastic. But also the evaluations, because it's not just about writing theoretical papers and saying how fantastic or not restorative justice is actually, are there any practices out there? What practices are out there, and who is evaluating these practices? Are they working? Are they reducing offending? Are they increasing victim satisfaction? So I guess we are getting there, and there is enough evidence. But again, it's a very general statement to make. We have evidence on what? On restorative justice in general, on restorative justice in hate crimes, on restorative justice and domestic violence, on restorative justice and theft. What is the evidence on? Where does it work? So we need, again, to be very clear and very careful when we talk about evidence and that restorative justice works. We have to be very specific. So this is where I pause, pass on to Sophia.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Theo. That was very elaborate of our approach to restorative justice again, I guess. And I'll be moving on to some emerging trends, basically around legislation, and then some recent developments related to restorative justice in the UK. Again, good news. So I won't get into detail, because we named already a few international law and policy around restorative justice. What I want to emphasize is that apparently RJ, as Theo mentioned, has moved from the periphery. It's not anymore a new concept. There are volumes and volumes on this. It's formally recognized in international law and policy, as well as in the UK. So it's apparently a need just to practice it properly and consistently. In terms of international law, I just highlight the Victims' Rights Directive. It's a significant step in establishing rights for crime victims, including RJ access. It's a very strong legal framework for restorative justice. Unfortunately, in 2022, the European Commission evaluated the Victims' Directive, identifying gaps in victims' empowerment. And we were happy enough waiting for the proposal, which came in 2023. It's through revision at the moment. But unfortunately, the obstacles in terms of restorative justice access for victims and offenders remain such an uneven RJ access is out there, and inconsistent integration in criminal processes. And with the revision, it doesn't seem that this will change much. But things are still in the process of the revision for the Council of the European Commission, for the European Union. So we're waiting for any development. As Thea mentioned, there are other recommendations, the Venice Declaration, which kind of confirm the existence and the need for restorative justice. but I'll just move on to what's in the UK. So RJ countries, at least in Europe, vary in how they structure restorative justice legally. We can broadly categorize it into these three approaches. So either there is comprehensive codified RJ laws that establish restorative justice clearly in the legal system. So as an example, that's definitely Germany. There is the practice-led approaches where restorative justice practices develop within the existing legal system without extensive and specific legislation. And lastly, there are fragmented approaches with scattered provisions without really having a specific legislation about restorative justice. As an example, that's Greece. UK's approach to RJ. So the UK falls under the second category. In fact, restorative justice has grown primarily through practices and policies rather than centralized legislation, which is now a thing. We can see restorative justice in the legislation, but it evolved, it emerged through practice. Of course, UK is quite particular because there are different RJ adaptations in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. But despite the lack of a unified RJ law, the UK's RJ practices have developed over the last year significantly, and especially in youth justice. Now, just if I go a bit deeper to UK law and the adult justice system, starting with the adult justice system, there are several entry points for restorative justice. RJ can be initiated early at the police level under the out-of-court disposals framework. Currently, the out-of-court disposal allows for community resolutions and adult conditional cautions, both of which cover restorative justice as an option. As a heads up, and Restorative Justice for All is part of the external advisory group to Met Police, who is currently reviewing this framework and tries to simplify it into a two-tier system. So it's going to be diversionary and community caution, both of which have as a basis restorative justice. Now, as another entry level, that's prosecution, court, and prison. The Code for Crown Prosecutors give guidance for restorative justice, alternatives to prosecution for both adults and youths, allowing for conditional cautions when appropriate. And the same holds true for courts. The Sentencing Act 2020 allows courts to adjourn sentences to make space for restorative justice activities, if desired by the parties, of course. However, despite the options being out there, what I need to highlight is that the application, at least in the adult system, remains quite limited and not consistent, and this is related to not having a unified legislation. While at prison level, RJ is offered, but there is no specific legislation. It's more discretionary and vary widely by institutions. Moving to the youth justice system, here things are a bit better, I would say. Already since 2001, the Youth Justice Board has supported extensively restorative justice, establishing national standards. RJ can be part of orders such as referral orders and youth rehabilitation orders. And the youth offending teams often apply restorative justice in rehabilitation programs following a youth caution or a conditional caution. So we can see that the youth justice system is better wired with RJ, with restorative justice, I would say, and is more consistently implemented throughout the UK. Now, having set the scene and established the legal framework in the UK, both for adult and youth justice system, I would like to move on and bring in the group to recent developments in line with restorative justice, and I'll start with the victims, with a victims code. So the victims code has been the only document explicitly addressing restorative justice for victims in the criminal justice process. and is intended to help victims understand and access restorative justice. However, going to the bad news now, it lacks enforceability and systemic monitoring, and that's why RJ remains inconsistently applied. We can see some boroughs having better services while others do not have the same RJ provision and offer. That's because police officers as an entry point might not even know that they have to offer it. Talking about the Victims Code, I need to say that last year RJ4All and other partners advocated for RJ's inclusion in the Victims and Prisoners Act in order to strengthen this legislative backing that I've been mentioning. Although RJ didn't make it to the face of the bill, so it's not in the Victims and Prisoners Act, the Act itself included several significant changes in order to improve the Victims Code's impact and enforceability. Going to some key updates that I bring, since RJ4All is active member and part of the discussions and the current consultations with the new government, the new Minister for Victims and Violence Against Women and Girls prioritizes victim empowerment and supports this whole upgrade through the Victims and Witness Sector Engagement Group. Again, RJ4All is active member, and only yesterday we had a follow-up meeting specifically on the Victims Code and how we can make sure that victims receive the support and the empowerment they need, including restorative justice. I'm happy to see that restorative justice is within those consultations and is part of the discussion. Some further updates related specifically to restorative justice within the Victims and Prisoners Act. It has been agreed that there will be a significant revision of the Victims Code, and that was the meeting we participated yesterday. And some key changes include a clear outline of responsibilities for upholding victims' rights, including access to RJ, increased obligations on public bodies to promote awareness of the code and what it entails, and it includes enhanced accountability measures by police and crime commissioners to make sure that police officers and criminal justice agencies and practitioners indeed apply the code. And last but not least, it's one of the proposed changes currently going through a revision, emphasizes restorative justice, introducing a new entitlement to victims to receive information about restorative justice, not only when reporting the crime at police level, but also following the outcome of a court case, so post-charge. These are some good news, and they kind of supplement another good news that comes, which is quite recent, only in October 2024. We heard in the news about the independent review of sentencing, and I'll explain how this is connected and related to restorative justice. Well, know about the recent capacity crisis in prisons due to rest capacity pressures. The UK's prison system is under significant strain, and we all know that. And the government's response seems to be to explore alternatives, particularly by reducing short-term sentences that show the highest reoffending rates. And we're happy to see that ministers within this framework, like this context of reviewing the sentencing bill, are exploring ways to make community sentences a trusted and viable alternative to prisons. This could mean tougher community sanctions, which can include structured restorative justice interventions. To put it simply, what they try to do is to show that community sentences are not a soft option for offenders. Among the principles guiding this review, one emphasizes expanding non-prison punishment, so a community-led justice. And I have to highlight that this aligns with Dr. Gabrielides' research on RJ as a form of restorative punishment. There has been a great discussion on whether restorative justice is an alternative to punishment or it's an alternative punishment, but what we state and hold is that restorative justice is a restorative punishment, which involves restorative pain, requiring offenders to face the harm they caused, bear accountability, and participate in the restoration of what they caused. Because I mentioned community-led justice, very quickly, and I won't take too much time, I want to mention the two different, if I may call, mechanisms of restorative provision, which is the structured restorative justice and the unstructured restorative justice framework. Very briefly, I'm not saying that one is correct, another one is not. I kind of believe that from both mechanisms, we take something and they're useful. Structured restorative justice refers to formalized, standardized processes within the criminal justice system. We see here that this approach kind of sees a violation of the law. The harm is a violation of the law, and human rights are legal restrictions that needs to be protected through the approach. This is what we see within the criminal justice system, while the unstructured restorative justice is what we see within communities. So we see a harm, a broken social liaison, a broken human relationship, and harmed parties. And restorative justice comes as a bottom-up approach within the community to see human rights as values that have been violated and figuring out a way to restore that human relationship that has been broken. So it's not about a law being broken, it's more about a human relationship being broken. I think that's all for me. I'm already taking too much of the time. So Theo first, off to you, and then to Lynn. Sorry, Theo, you're muted.
There you go. Sorry about that. So yeah, now going back into my kind of more critical approach with restorative justice, I think I'm just going to mention a few things that I think the restorative justice movement could be looking at and help develop the concept even further. I think one of the issues that we keep having to deal with is this multiple understandings of restorative justice, the plethora of definitions, and the many different lists of principles and standards. And this doesn't seem to be some sort of consensus around around what it stands for, which in a way, kind of for me, is not a bad thing. I mean, I kept saying, don't stress too much about definitions. You can call this restorative justice whatever you want, as long as the values and the principles are honored. And one of the problems that I think I've identified on a number of occasions is to what extent our practices and our narratives and our articles are aligned with the original intentions of restorative justice and its community-led nature. Which takes me to the second point on the presentation about standardizing restorative justice. So yeah, one of my concerns that I've seen in the UK and across the world, kind of a standardization of restorative justice in the sense of like, this is how it should be done. These are the scripts. These are the processes. There's no room for for flexibility. When actually, as I said, going back into the very roots of restorative justice as a community methodology for addressing harm, that was not the case, and it should be should be in the hands of those who have been given the restorative justice option back into their own hands. So if we are going to return conflict as property, let's return conflict as property and safeguard its community-led nature. The other problem that I have by standardizing restorative justice and claiming that one model is better than another model is, okay, so who is actually going to guard the guardians, as the Latins used to say. So if you are the one that is professing that that model is the best and you're the guardian of the model, who is going to guard you? And as we know, unlike the criminal justice system, or at least our profession, barristers, for example, are regulated by a regulator, solicitors, a different one. Who is guarding the guardians? And then, you know, the standards for whom and by whom? You know, are these specific bodies that are being paid to set up standards, or are these standards that the community is setting? Are the standards that we are drawing from the narrative and philosophy of restorative justice? Do people who write the standards and ask us to follow those standards read or written anything about the philosophy of restorative justice? Where did they find those standards? So all those are questions that I'm asking to honestly find the consensus and look at the way that we have been developing those claims and those standards, so that we are walking the talk. And you know, at the end of the day, I'm asking who owns restorative justice, because if restorative justice should be owned by the parties, should be owned by the communities, then why are we so stressed about you know, our organizations and who is doing what? And that leads me to kind of my biggest concern of all, which, you know, I call it the McDonaldization of restorative justice. You know, why are we manufacturing restorative justice? Why are we trying so hard? Why are we stressing to see restorative justice being rolled out? To what end? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just asking, what is the purpose for that? And while doing so, whether you are in the training space of restorative justice, the practice space of restorative justice, what is your model? What is your principles? What is your priorities when you prepare trainings for restorative justice? I have seen, and I have said this in many occasions, including, you know, a parliamentary inquiry that was long some time ago on restorative justice and its effectiveness, that I am concerned when I see a 3-day training package that is offered to prison officers, and making them believe that by taking that 3-day training, they can now practice restorative justice in prisons. This is not a theoretical point. This was actually an expectation of the government of the time, that by giving training to prison guards after 3 days, they'll be able to pick it up and do restorative justice. There's just not one example. There are many examples of creating a business out of education and training of restorative justice. A 3-day training would not do the job. What will do the job? Definitely not a 3-day training. So let's allow the educator, regulator, Ofqual, or whoever is regulating the levels of education in this country or internationally, to tell us what is a good level of education for restorative justice. And also, you know, it's not just the business of education, it's also the business of casework. My model is better than yours, actually. So how many cases did you have? What sort of cases? Where is the evaluation? Where are the data? What did the victim get out of it? What did the offender get out of it? Where are you now? And when you start asking those questions, the cases start to drop, the numbers start to drop, and you start asking, where is restorative justice? So these are kind of some of the self-criticisms, if you like, before you start asking those questions yourselves. And I have asked those questions many times in the past myself, and I have to say we're still a long way from answering all of those questions, and there are even more. So yeah, this is where I pause, and maybe now Lynn can tell you what brought us together, the restorative justice and skills for justice. If you're not familiar with the skills for justice approach, and as Laura said, one of their purposes is to raise standard and education, we were very interested in partnering, especially because Skills for Justice have been involved in what they call occupational standards for restorative justice, and I was particularly keen to tap into those standards that they put together after consultation with the sector and criminal justice practitioners. So coming together as organizations to, and this seminar is just launching our relationship, so hopefully for many years to come, we can collectively and with you as members, or if you would like to join the organizations as individuals or as organizations, see what we can do together to further develop the concept and the practice of restorative justice. So yeah, over to you, Ling.
Thank you, Theo, for your introduction and your briefing about the context and also the goals of the partnership between RJ4All and Skills for Justice. Yeah, that's to highlight that the partnership is among our shared vision to promote the application of restorative justice ethos. I am bringing you a very good news about what also the benefit that partnership between the two organizations will bring to you will bring to those persons care about restorative justice practice. But before briefing you about the detail of the partnership, I would like to highlight the RJ4All restorative justice framework. So it is an up-to-date guide in implementing restorative justice through its practice of victim offender mediation, circle, conference. So it somehow will address some concern that Theo mentioned before. So it will be applied to both direct and indirect restorative justice, whether it's will be conducted face-to-face or online. So I would like to recommend you to check out our publication to visit that resources on restorative justice practice. Next slide, please. Now, when you join the membership of either RJ4All or Skills for Justice, you will be automatically enjoy a wide range of benefits from both organizations. Next slide, please. As a member, you will gain access to the knowledge hub and resources of both RJ4All and Skills for Justice. This includes the CBD certified e-course, high-quality journal on restorative justice and related practice, a library of select publication, and also the apprenticeship training provider checklist. By joining RJ4All and Skills for Justice, you will become the part of global restorative justice movement. Next slide, please. And when you become part of the global restorative justice movement, we will keep you informed about our progress, upcoming events, and partnership opportunities. Our network will ensure that together we can work together to amplify our voice and initiative to promote the value of restorative justice worldwide. Next, additionally, you will receive discount on services like the venue high, premium publication, and e-course as well. Next slide, please. And now I would like to introduce you to the UK, the first level 5 regulated diploma in restorative justice, currently under consideration by the Office of Qualification and Examination Regulation of the UK. So this diploma will provide you the formal qualification to become a certified restorative justice practitioner as because when you become a member, when you join the membership, you will receive a discount on this course. So as Theo and Sophia already mentioned about the importance of like proper and quality education on restorative justice. So it's not about 3 days or 4 days, a short course to become a restorative justice practitioner. So we are filling the gap by providing a high quality and like well-designed restorative justice diploma, which will be brought to you by a qualified restorative justice practitioner. So if you would like to know more, please drop your email in the chat box and we are more than happy to provide more information. And now I would like to invite you to watch a very short video that will give you further insight into the diploma. Sophia, can you help to play the video?
Are you finding a pathway to become an accredited restorative justice practitioner? At RJ4All Education, we're launching the first Level 5 regulated diploma in restorative justice practice designed for you, whether you're just starting out or advancing your career. You can build a strong theoretical foundation and gain hands-on experience through supervised casework, guided by experts in the field, combined all in one course. This one-year program offers flexible arrangements and a hybrid learning environment. Plus, you can join a 3-day professional development workshop led by world-class experts. With affordable fees and free access to our exclusive resources, unlock your future in restorative justice with us. Leave your contact details for a free consultation and start your journey in restorative justice today. RJ4All Education, restoring restorative justice education.
Thank you.
Are
So
you
the
finding a
final message.
pathway to become an accredited restorative justice?
Thank you. So the final message is to say that like RJ4 and Skill for Justice are on way there with our rich resources and library and publication and e-course and education opportunities on restorative justice to bring to you to support your career path in terms of to become a qualified restorative justice practitioner. Thank you. And I would like to hand over to Sophia for the rest of the presentation.
I think it's me.
That's off you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. After the short advert, I'm concluding with some aspirational questions, I guess. Some of them are more for those who are in the RJ movement. Others is for everybody. Yeah, and just building on what we covered today. I was wondering, what if we could unite the restorative justice movement under one roof? Would that make a voice stronger, and would a stronger voice help move things forward for justice and criminal justice? And what if we stopped focusing and obsessing too much to defend restorative justice and shift some of that energy and some of that time and some of those resources onto developing its processes and theory? You know, there's just so much anxiety about saying how better restorative justice is as opposed to the criminal justice system. You know, what if we stopped doing that and stop feeling that we have to justify the presence and existence of restorative justice and focus more on developing its theory? Where would that take us? And the same goes for coexisting with criminal justice. Sophia was very kind to present my models of the structured and unstructured way of doing restorative justice that literally presents options, and neither of those models are better than the other. Existing with the criminal justice system is as good as being outside of the criminal justice system, as long as justice is delivered and justice is done. And then now in terms of the educational stuff, which is one of the reasons we chose for this year's International Restorative Justice Week theme to focus on education. What if we stopped obsessing regulating restorative justice and creating regulatory bodies and registers and membership fees, and focus more on regulating its education? Which is why I was so keen to allow the regulator to look at our own educational initiative and scrutinize it, and if good enough, then to say that it has been regulated, and it is being regulated, and if anything is not followed, then to be penalized for not following the regulation. So what if we stop regulating restorative justice and regulated its education? Would that improve practice and theory? And finally, you know, going back to the principles and the the standards, and honoring restorative justice community-led nature, how about we could all come together and co-design with affected parties a mandate for restorative justice with principles that are aligned with people's needs and realities, not of yesterday, but of today's. Is that possible? And would that make a difference? All these are aspirational questions. There are questions, but there are questions that I think my institute is very interested in. And that's why we mentioned some of the initiatives we're having the seminar with you. And hopefully that conversation will continue. If you are interested in finding out more about our educational new endeavor, and you want to be a partner and deliver the course, let us know. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. There are some references at the end if you want to follow up some of the things that we said and withdraw from the literature. And hopefully we left enough time, 10 minutes. I think we did quite well, guys. Left 10 minutes for discussion. I think Laura would take it from here. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Thea. You did very well to get through all that content within the time frame. Thank you so much. So thank you to Thea, Sophia and Lynn for that brilliant walkthrough. Really, really insightful of the law and legislation and the benefits and the best practice across the restorative justice at the moment and what the future focus will be. Yeah, some really insightful considerations there. Thank you very much for your time. Just before we get to any questions, I just wanted to move us on to quickly have a quick look at how the criminal justice and youth justice space interconnect really around some of the national occupational standards. So before we get into the questions, and please do start to submit those using the question and answer button at the top of the screen there. I just quickly wanted to focus on that crossover really between youth justice and restorative justice. So you may be aware that Skills for Justice are currently in the process of updating the national occupational standards that relate to youth justice. There were previously around 55 national occupational standards in this space. Skills for Justice have led an expert working group to review and update these. I believe they've got them down to about 22 now to ensure they're still relevant and reflect the correct language across the space now. So they are being reviewed and there will be a public consultation going live next week. And we'd really welcome your input and oversight and feedback into those. So if you'd like to register to receive information when the consultation is open for responses, you can do so with the Q&R code at the bottom of the screen there. For anyone who's not aware of national occupational standards, they are a national standard across the UK that are used to build qualifications, apprenticeships, training programmes. They can support with developing job descriptions and to support with measuring workplace competence. So it's really, really important that we get these right to provide a really substantial framework across the youth justice space. So we'd really welcome your input on those. Thank you very much. And yeah, hopefully you can use the QR code to register for that. Just before we then move on to question and answers, just to remind everybody that there will be an email following afterwards with the link to the webinar, any FAQs that we haven't got through, and there will be a short feedback survey as well. We'd really appreciate if you could just take a couple of moments to fill that out. I'll just have a look now at the question and answers. So we've got one here that says, how does restorative justice contribute to reducing reoffending, and what evidence or mechanisms demonstrate its effectiveness in comparison to traditional punitive approaches? I think you touched on that a little bit, Sophia, in terms of that community approach, but is anybody happy to pick that one up and answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll start, and maybe Sophia, you can give some examples. Yeah, I mean, that's a very big question. As I said before, that when it comes to the effectiveness of restorative justice, whether that relates to the offender or the victim, we've got to be very specific. So when we ask that question, are we speaking about adult offenders? Are we speaking about youth offenders? Are we speaking about specific crimes? How does it do that? The main practices, and as I said before, there's a difference between restorative justice as a kind of concept, as an ethos, and its practices, which divert cases from the justice system, are through mediation. So that brings two people together, conferencing, that brings a lot more people together, circles, which is, again, it opens up the debate and the dialogue to the affected community, and it takes the form of a circle. And there are other practices that do that as well. The similarities of all those practices is that, as I said before, it just gives the option for the offender and the victim to deal with the conflict themselves and come into an agreement after they have a debate about what happened. The foundation of that debate is not so much naming and punishing in the usual way. The focus of it is what has been the harm, which is why we try not to use terms such as victims and offenders, and we focus so much on the harm itself, saying that there are harmed and harming parties. And by enabling that dialogue and that conversation and trying to see how that harm can be restored, can help reduce the numbers, if you like. But as I said before, it depends on what sort of harm we are talking about. By entering into that dialogue of acknowledging harm and restoring harm, then that process of transformation allows for the person who has harm to realize the harm that was done and stop doing it. We have seen some successes, as I said before. This has been going on for some time, and there are documented in the literature. And as we said before, this can happen both within the formal justice system in the way that Sophia explained, the different points of entry, but also within the community. So this is kind of at the informal stage, or if you like, at the diversion stage, where the case just gets out of the formal justice system and goes back into the hands of the community.
Just a very quick note, because Theo kind of mentioned it now, we don't advocate that restorative justice is the panacea, it's the solution, one size fits all for everything, every time. There should be an assessment. For some cases, it might not be the right option. It's always in the hands of the people, the harmed and harming parties involved in a harm, to decide whether this is the right option. And always there should be safeguards in place to make sure that we don't overstep, we don't overdo, we don't want to re-traumatize people involved in the process. So it's not just a blanket theory that restorative justice reduces reoffending. We don't say that. It's always a matter of the specific case. And just as a last point and note is, it's interesting to see that the government picks up on the evidence and shifts towards more community-led justice. We see that from the independent review of sentencing. They kind of realize, after the evidence that is out there in the literature, that community-led is not a soft option. It can be as tough as imprisonment, or in our opinion, even more than that.
Thank you. Probably got time for one more question. So Bashizi's asked, what are the potential causes for the lack of specific RJ legislation for adult prisoners in the UK?
What are the specific?
What are the potential causes for the lack of specific RJ legislation for adult prisoners in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you share your thoughts, Sophia. I know you've been involved in this for a bit. The point I'm going to make is I wouldn't stress too much about legislation. I mean, we have had legislation for restorative justice for other stages of the criminal justice system, and yet actually that might have backfired, to be honest. Legislation is not going to solve the problem. It is not going to promote restorative justice. Why there is no specific legislation within the implementation of restorative justice within prison, that I cannot answer. The legislator might have their own reasons, but I would say that restorative justice is being practiced in prisons, not in the sense of reducing the offence or removing the sentence, but as part of the rehabilitation goals that the prison system has. Just to clarify, the implications of restorative justice at the point of sentencing, which includes prison, is at the court stage. So at the court stage, when the sentence is being passed, restorative justice is available. So if the judge offers restorative justice and restorative justice is taken, then that sentence could be reduced or could be replaced. And that's where restorative justice can come in relation to imprisonment and sentencing. Its implementations in prisons is very much piecemeal and depends on the prison governor, and it's been done in different ways. So yeah, that's all I can say in relation to that. I don't know, Sophia, if you want to say more.
I totally echo that. I wouldn't stress about legislation. Obviously, I can't say why regulators have not legislated at the prison level. But my opinion, is that because it was probably, like in the UK in general, and as I mentioned, RJ really evolved intrinsically through practice. And as Theo mentioned, prison has been a setting that restorative justice has been widely implemented, even probably more than prison entry level. So probably because it's been practiced a lot, and every prison, I would say, has its own settings and standards, could be a reason that it's not legislated. And if I connect this with the opposition that we faced for the Victims and Prisoners Bill, and the reason that, like, an argument we heard from the government of not involving RJ on the face of the bill, not just in the Victims Code, was because they kind of sometimes see RJ as a victim service, as another victim service, and we try to clarify and explain that it's not just another victim service, it's not just a provision and a service offered to victims, is much more than this, is a system, is a mechanism of involving everyone, including the harming party, the harmed party, community, families. But yeah, just bringing a counter argument we had from the government while advocating for the inclusion of RJ in the legislation, that probably they see it merely as another victim service, which is not the case in my opinion. But yeah, just an example of a position we faced.
Thank you both. We've run out of time there. There was a question that we haven't managed to ask, so we'll provide a summary of that within the email that gets shared afterwards, along with the link and the feedback and any further information. All of our details are on the screen now, so if you've got any questions, we're more than happy to be contacted. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that we can support with going forwards. Huge thank you again to RJ4All. Really appreciate your time, Theo, Sophia and Lynn, and all the information that you've shared with us today. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for attending and joining. Hope you have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.